Most people believe that confidence is something that can only be destroyed by direct criticism or open hostility. They imagine that when someone wants to undermine them, that person will attack their ideas, question their abilities, or openly challenge them. But in reality, the most effective attacks on confidence are rarely direct. They happen quietly, through subtle conversation patterns that slowly reshape how you see yourself. There is a particular communication pattern that many people encounter without realizing it. It does not sound aggressive. It does not sound insulting. In fact, it often sounds supportive, thoughtful, or even caring. Yet over time, this pattern can weaken a person's confidence, make them doubt their decisions, and slowly transfer control of the conversation, and sometimes the entire relationship, to the person using it. The pattern works because it mixes agreement with subtle doubt. Instead of saying, "Oh, you're wrong," the person says something like, "I understand what you mean, but are you sure that's the best way to do it?" On the surface, this sounds reasonable. It sounds like someone offering perspective. But when this pattern repeats again and again, something begins to happen inside the mind of the listener. Each time a person expresses an idea, the response gently introduces uncertainty. Not enough to trigger resistance, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. Over time, the brain starts associating speaking up with uncertainty. The person begins to hesitate before sharing opinions. They begin to question their own reasoning, and slowly their confidence begins to shrink. Psychologists sometimes refer to this type of interaction as confidence erosion through conversational framing. It is not about direct disagreement. It is about repeatedly reframing someone's statements so that their ideas seem incomplete, questionable, or slightly misguided. Imagine a simple conversation at work. You suggest a plan. Instead of rejecting it directly, someone responds, "That's interesting. I just wonder if it might create problems later." You explain your reasoning. They nod and reply, "I see your point. I'm just thinking there might be a better approach." The conversation continues this way. Nothing openly hostile is said, but by the end of the discussion, you may feel uncertain about your own proposal. The key to this pattern is repetition. A single moment of doubt does not weaken confidence, but repeated exposure does. Human confidence is strongly influenced by feedback from others. When someone repeatedly introduces small amounts of doubt into our thinking, the brain gradually adapts. It begins to assume that our judgments may not be reliable. Another element of this pattern is emotional tone. The person using it usually remains calm, polite, and reasonable. Because of this, the listener rarely interprets the interaction as manipulation. The brain tends to associate calmness with trustworthiness. So even when the conversation repeatedly weakens your position, you may still feel that the other person is simply being thoughtful. This is why the pattern is so powerful. It operates below the level of obvious conflict. There is no argument to defend against. There is no clear attack to reject. There is only a slow, steady introduction of doubt. Over time, the psychological effects can become significant. The person exposed to this pattern may begin to seek approval before making decisions. They may become less assertive in discussions. They may defer more often to the person who has been subtly questioning their ideas. Eventually, the dynamic of the relationship changes. One person becomes the confident voice, while the other becomes the uncertain one. What makes this pattern particularly interesting is that the person using it may not always be consciously aware of what they are doing. Some individuals develop this communication style because it gives them influence in conversations. By gently questioning others, rather than directly opposing them, they avoid conflict while still steering decisions. However, in other situations, the pattern can be used intentionally as a form of psychological control. Skilled manipulators understand that confidence is a critical factor in human behavior. If you can weaken someone's confidence, you make them easier to influence. They begin to rely more on external validation and guidance. The most common environments where this pattern appears are workplaces, relationships, and social groups where subtle power dynamics exist. In professional settings, it may appear as constant constructive questioning. In relationships, it may appear as gentle but persistent doubt about your judgments or decisions. For example, someone might respond to your ideas with phrases like, "I just worry that might not work out," or "Are you sure that's the best choice?" or "I'm not saying you're wrong, I just think there may be a better option." Each statement alone seems harmless, but repeated over weeks or months, the pattern gradually changes how you see your own abilities. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward protecting your confidence. Awareness allows you to separate helpful feedback from repetitive doubt. Healthy conversations involve discussion, disagreement, and sometimes questioning. But healthy feedback usually includes clear reasoning and balanced exchange. When questioning becomes a consistent pattern that only moves in one direction, always placing your ideas under doubt while elevating the other person's perspective, that is when confidence erosion may be taking place. One useful strategy is to observe the overall pattern rather than individual sentences. Ask yourself whether your ideas are consistently being reframed as uncertain, while the other person's ideas are presented as more reliable. If that pattern repeats frequently, it may indicate that the conversation dynamic is affecting your confidence. Another important step is maintaining internal validation. Confidence is strongest when it comes from both internal judgment and external feedback. If your sense of certainty depends entirely on how others respond, you become vulnerable to conversational influence. Strong communicators remain open to feedback while still trusting their own reasoning. They evaluate criticism based on evidence rather than tone. They recognize that calm questioning is not always neutral. Sometimes it's simply a softer way of steering the conversation. In many cases, once you become aware of this pattern, its influence decreases dramatically. The brain is far less susceptible to subtle manipulation when it can clearly identify what is happening. Confidence is not usually destroyed by a single conversation. It is shaped slowly through repeated interactions. In the same way, protecting your confidence is not about winning arguments. It is about recognizing patterns, maintaining self-trust, and ensuring that discussions remain balanced rather than one-sided. The next time someone gently questions your ideas in a way that seems supportive, but leaves you feeling uncertain, pause for a moment and observe the pattern. Ask yourself whether the conversation is truly collaborative or whether it is slowly shifting your confidence away from you. Because the most powerful psychological influence rarely comes through force. It comes through subtle patterns that reshape how we think, one conversation at a time.